Welcome to the All Things DER podcast, brought to you by AEIC. In this podcast, we dig in, define, and discuss where the new energy economy is heading with electric industry leaders and explore all the ways that distributed energy resources can modernize and improve our ever-evolving power grid. Thank you for joining us.
Welcome to the All Things DER podcast, and I'm very excited about today's conversation with Josh Brumberger, who is the CEO of Utilidata. So I'm going to throw it over to you, Josh. One, thanks for joining us. And two, let's hear a little bit about yourself and what you've been working on.
Great. Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. As you mentioned, I'm Josh Brumberger. I'm the CEO at Utilidata. We have an energy technology platform that essentially speeds up the integration of clean energy resources to make the process faster, to make the ultimate outcome more resilient and more valuable for a whole host of stakeholders. I've been the CEO at Utilidata for about 5 years now. I've been with the company for just about 8. Prior to joining Utilidata, I had a background in politics and in government and financial services. I've done everything from presidential campaign to I was deputy treasurer most recently in Rhode Island, and did a stint in private equity in between there. So I have a kind of somewhat of a quirky background, but I think the diverse perspectives that I've had throughout my career, I think, make me well suited to lead the organization at this point.
That's very exciting, and that is a quirky background. So one thing the listeners here know is that this podcast, hence the title, All Things DER, distributed energy resources, which is ultimately any active customer interaction with the edge of the grid. So, and another big thing for my avid listeners is I'm all about the power of data.
Yep.
So one reason why you're here, I don't know, it might be because your title of your company is Utilidata, but maybe not. So all I have to say, you are engaged in the industry right now at a very pivotal time. So I would just like to see, what do you foresee as really some of the challenges, but also opportunities that all of your industry partners are currently working through with this changing distribution system?
Yeah, it's the how many $1 trillion question at this point. It's sort of multifaceted answer. I think the way I sort of think about, the next couple decades, you've got 3 major pillars of change that are all happening. There's one, obviously, that's the technology. We spend a lot of time, thinking about that as an organization, and how do you drive the right technology into the system to drive value today that people can understand, but also ready it for all the needs that are going to come down the pike. So technology is obviously a big piece of the puzzle, but also there's got to be a business model change, right? So there are certain commercial drivers that have led the system in the industry for successfully, right, for a long time. I think we need to start playing with those commercial models, and then tied to that is also, regulatory and policy models. So when people think about innovation, your mind's eye immediately goes to technology, right? But I think really as an industry, what's both, an opportunity and a challenge is we're really innovating in 3 facets, right? We've got to innovate in the technology, we've got to innovate in the business model and the commercial side, and then we also have to innovate with policymakers and regulators. And so change is really hard. Innovation in any one of those entities alone is really hard, right? Let alone trying to couple them and find that nexus. So I think about, I think it's an opportunity. We're going to have to do things faster than we have in the past. All things DERs. There are a lot of DERs coming online real fast. The federal government's about to instigate hundreds of billions of dollars worth of more solar and batteries and electric vehicles. So we're going to get up that curve really quickly. And so I think the biggest, I think collectively as an industry, we've got to get a little more comfortable being uncomfortable, because change is uncomfortable. And I think in there is the opportunity. You rightfully pointed out when I talked about my background being a little bit quirky. I think it's going to take new backgrounds into the industry to a certain extent, and new perspectives and new ways of thinking about things and doing things, because change has happened in other industries. It's been a little slower in this industry for all the obvious reasons. Resiliency and safety needs to still be the bedrock of this industry. But we are going to have to move faster, and we're going to have to make a system that is more valuable, and it can't leave, a big chunk of society behind. the distribution grid has to serve everybody. And so we've got to think about ways in which the benefits of distributed energy resources don't just accrue to the folks who can afford upfront payments, but they should accrue to the broader system and strengthen the system as a whole. So great opportunity, huge challenge. I love it. I think it's a really exciting time to be doing what you and I do.
Yes, I have. So I hear embrace feeling uncomfortable. That's like a motto I have every day, being
Good.
that personal as well as with work and all relationships. But then also I heard the power of three, which I love, and that's technology, business, and the regulatory model. They're all coming to a head. What is that synergy within there that we can really drive a change? So yeah, it's a good summation of these heavy opportunities that we have. And I guess you did mention DER and you said solar and charging and batteries, or AK vehicles. And I think one thing about our industry, because we are who we are in the last 140 years, we built a very robust large grid with a significant amount of capacity because we built things to last.
Yeah.
But over the last 60 years, we really, topped off in our regards to efficiency. And so we've been filling up that capacity. And now from all the way from the generation to transmission to distribution and even the customer. So there's something dynamically happening across our states, right, in regards to the adoption of said new technology. What do you think, for those that really haven't seen that swift change, but those industry partners you worked with where they suddenly did, what do you think their greatest lesson learned was for that uptick of DER under the grid? Like, what was, when you talk with your partners, like, what are like, I wish we had, or I wish we would have?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, it's access to real-time information that you can do something with. And also, how do we start not thinking about everything in programs, but start to think about everything a little bit more holistically, right? If you're a consumer and you've got an EV and you've got solar and you've got a smart thermostat and you've got other smart appliances, you're not going to want to be in 5, 6, 7, 8 various utility programs. Ideally, you're going to have the most optimized via technology and via policy and via commercial model, the most optimized way for you to both, draw and potentially provide power. So I think it is just having that real granular distributed level of information that both parties are confident can provide the level of transparency and potential control capabilities that could stitch together the system in a really valuable way. And I also think that, this is not everybody in the industry, but I think there's this somewhat of a growing sentiment. If we're going to iterate and we're going to innovate and we're going to do this fast enough, you do have to have the underlying technologies that are purpose-built to allow for that iteration, that innovation.
And I think that technology you speak of is this idea that you can communicate and talk to many of many, right? Like, so you're going from a...
Right. You can communicate and talk to many and many. And right, to your point, once upon a time, there were a handful of nodes that produced all the generation. Now there's potentially millions of nodes that will have those capabilities to both, produce and consume power, depending on the facet at the very local level. But I think about, if you think about things, it wasn't that long ago with your cell phone where you had like nights and weekends, right? Remember that? I don't think anyone would tolerate that anymore. I don't think, customers. So if you think about, very, very, very static time of use rates, it's a start, right? But it's just a start. And how do you move to more dynamic pricing and things like that? And so the technology's got to exist, and the ability to innovate on those regulatory models and commercial models has to be able to exist to be able to continue to improve on programs. Right. The idea that a program that we set today with the existing technology today and what we know about time of use rates today, the notion that is not going to be outdated in 5 years from now, I think is something of a fallacy. And so, typically you said this, right? We plan in multi-decade processes, and it's worked. It's worked great. My power's on all the time, but it's, we're going into a new era. And so I think thinking about what we can learn from other industries is something that I've started to hear a lot more of in our space. There's always been this notion that it's so unique and each utility is so unique, but I think there's some acceptance now that we can look to other industries and we can look to each other to make certain advancements, specifically as this complexity, continues to drive forward.
So in the end, what everyone kind of wants their hands on after the fact, when the rubber meets the road for this new technology on their grid, is if we only had the data and the information to be able to plan proactively, So
Yes.
for our listeners, I just want to pull up. When you think about planning in the grid, as you said, decades, we literally did forecasts for 3, 5, 10 year. However, things that are rapidly changing right now, we need the information to drive the forecast, to build the models, to verify the models, to run the analyses, to then go build. And so that like quick response is utmost necessary. And the only way we can have that intel is having the fundamental technology to bring that information back.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And I think, and again, you don't want to confuse digitization with the type of technologies that you're talking about, right? Because, it wasn't all that long ago that everyone had an atlas in their car. And there was digitization. It turned into MapQuest, right? And so that was digitization. Now, all of a sudden, you could access, you could type in where you wanted to go and you could get a printout and you'd be able to go on your way. And so I think, we can't stop there, right? We've got to go to that next phase of, what you experience now with Waze, right? And Google Maps.
Right.
It understands where you are. It understands where all the other nodes that our cars are. It understands the potential to reroute traffic for the benefit of all the cars, right? And so I think those technologies have taken hold in other industries quite successfully. And so I think one of the things that is exciting about this is it's not the technology risk. Of course, there's always risk in new technologies, but we can go through dozens of industries that have gone through this kind of transformation, right? So the technology risk is not necessarily as great as we think it is.
Right. It's almost like we're kind of lucking out because we're not trailblazing these risks with this technology. What we are, though, is the business model and the regulatory model. So
Exactly.
the technology has been deployed and we've been able to operate to many. And I think for our listeners and just those that are not in the power industry, the idea of how an electron flows from the generator, the transmission, the distribution to the edge is something that it's a niche. And one, it's very exciting, so you should all learn about it. But two, you should realize that it requires a significant amount of planning. And we're going from planning of years to now a year to really, as you said, like MapQuest to Google is you're doing planning in a day ahead. You're doing planning in real time. And so the only thing that's going to get us there is having this data, and the power of data will drive, I think, the capability for, this is me just saying, we as energy users to think of it differently, but not to be forced, right? Like it would be just like how we all love Waze and Google Maps, we will embrace how our house uses energy, how our car uses energy in a way that's good for us and save us money while also making it possible.
Yeah,
so,
people want like, you want ease of integration with everything, right? You just come to expect that, if there's a new app, you could have it on your phone in seconds and it could be providing a ton of value that you didn't have in your life beforehand. I think access to information, ease of sharing that information, the fact that, there are partners behind the scenes that are thinking about how do you couple some of that information to create even more value, right? And I think it's data at a very granular level. How easy is it to get that data? How actionable is that data? And then can you get it into the hands of people that are going to do special things with it? And I think that's kind of what we're after.
So I'm going to give you one more question, maybe a little bit nerdier, but from helping your operations of your partners, what has been an innovative solution that you've seen kind of identified and then executed and then support the utility to balance this new customer need?
For me, it's just been this kind of engagement, folks inside the utility that understand what's ultimately needed at the edge to drive, the systems and the processes moving forward, and, how it's going to take rallying the troops inside, large, to date, very successful bureaucracies of doing what they do. But how do you instigate the kind of passion and, trusted information and bring together a bunch of stakeholders? Because you've got to, when you think about from your post planning for the grid of the future, you've got to understand that your customer ops team, your grid ops team, your regulatory team, your executives, that everyone understands why this is so valuable, right? And why folks are going to need, get a little more comfortable being uncomfortable. And so I think it is really just finding those folks inside the utilities that are just ready to go for it. It's not a program, right? But that to me has been the most exciting change that we've noticed, that there are that there are folks out there, and when they dig into these organizations, you see the want to change. And that's really hard. And that's been something special that we've seen of late a lot.
Right. The only certainty is change, and we all just like change.
Yeah.
So
It's really hard.
this is great. Yeah. Well, I just want to say thank you for your insights. And I believe you're right that it does take really an innovator's spirit to really discover the mindset to pursue the impossible. So it takes a lot of us soldiers to really have these conversations and communicate out, change that business model, change the regulatory model, and ultimately rely on the technology that's been proven. So with that, Josh, I just want to thank you again for your time and your insights, and I look forward to working on this journey with you.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
That's a wrap for this week's episode of All Things DER. Thanks for tuning in. We hope today's conversation got you thinking about new and creative ways to improve our power grid. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to be the first to hear new episodes. This podcast is brought to you by AEIC, the place where operations leaders come together to share knowledge and provide guidance to the electric utility industry. We'll be back with a new episode soon. Until then, keep powering on.